I challenge you to a duel.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Movie Duel podcast. My name is Peter and I am your host. Here at Movie Duel, each episode we select a subject that's based around movies, and then myself and my co-host pick a movie that we think best represents that subject, and then discuss our reasons why. For those of you that have been following the Movie Duel podcast, you will know that since the last episode we've moved to a slightly different format where each episode has a different co-host. On episode 5, the worst video game adaptation, discussed Super Mario Bros. And Blood Rain with the fantastic Nicole Davis. And this week I've got another brand new guest who will be here to discuss our selections for the best Paul Verhoeven movie. So just a couple of things before we get into that discussion. Just a warning, there will be spoilers for both films that we are discussing on this episode of the podcast. Secondly, unfortunately during the end of this episode we had a bit of a technical glitch, which means the usual sort of section on other films that we considered for our picks has been lost in the ether, so is not included. So it does end slightly abruptly, but unfortunately not much we can do about that. It still doesn't take away from the discussion, so apologies for that. And then lastly, just a quick thank you to people who have left a rating and a review on various podcasting platforms, and a plea really to anybody who hasn't. It does help us start to gain new listeners. It's good for us to get the feedback. So if you haven't done, if you could, it would be very much appreciated just to give us a little rating and review. But yes, there we go. And without further ado, we shall go over and meet our next guest co-host.
Buongiorno.
Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Vanessa. Hi Vanessa, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm very excited to have a new guest on and talk some Paul Verhoeven. So, yep. Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Vanessa Cordner. I live in central Scotland and I live with my husband and 2 dogs. This is the first time I've ever done a podcast, so I'm a little bit nervous. But I've been a massive fan of film podcasts for a few years. I think that I came across the Movie Duel podcast in the Evolution of Horror Facebook group. That was one of the first kind of film podcasts that I really got into in a big way, but since then I've got into quite a few more, predominantly horror based, but also non-horror stuff as well. Like, I mean, this podcast obviously covers horror, but not just horror. And yeah, I really like horror films, but I've got a big thing. When I think about like all my favourite movies, I would say a lot of them are from the 90s, and the one I've picked today is from the 90s. I was born in 1984, so, and I'm very much from the kind of video shop. Like, we had a Global Video in our local town, but we also had like an independent video shop as well. And on a Friday night we used to go like as a family and we would rent, I think it was like 3 for the price of 2. I think not Global, the other one, Blockbuster, did that as well. And my mum and dad were never that bothered excuse me, about what we saw, so I saw quite a lot of stuff probably when I was a little bit too young to see it. And there was, you know, I think a lot of really good stuff made in the 90s. So horror is probably my passion, but I've got a lot of time for a lot of 90s movies, quite like some sci-fi stuff. Also like musicals and like early Disney. Pretty much will watch just about anything apart from, I don't know, I don't like really crap comedy. I like good comedy, but I don't think there are many good comedies about anymore. Okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just...
I know what you mean.
But yeah.
Actually, I was speaking to somebody at work the other day, a young person, but they have actually no memory of Blockbuster Video.
That's sad.
They did not know what I was talking about when I was talking about Blockbuster Video, and I felt so old.
But do you not think, though, like, like, I feel old when I hear stuff like that as well, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, I'm really glad I got to experience going into a video rental shop and actually looking at and being like, oh, I really fancy... This is probably why I like horror, actually. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but it was the horror section of the local video shop because all the covers just looked so cool. Because they had all these disgusting things on them. And when you were a kid, when I was like 10 or whatever, I'd be like, wow, I really want to see that just because of the cover. And do you know what I mean?
Well, you don't have that surprise of anything anymore, because when you were picking something from a video shop, you're basing it on the front cover, maybe who's in it, directed it, but or the blurb on the back that's telling you about the film. And, you know, now if you're picking a film, Netflix, Amazon Prime, or whatever you use, you've got everything at your fingertips. It tells you what the IMDb rating is, tells you, you know, the synopsis, it'll show you the trailer, it'll, you know, give you all that information. You can sort of go, no, I don't fancy that, that looks crap. Whereas you get that, you don't see so many, you're not going to see as many shit films, basically, because you've got that information there.
Yeah, I had a thing for a while where I like refused to watch anything if the IMDb rating was like below a certain, but actually some really good films have crap IMDb, especially horror films, have really crap IMDb ratings. So now I try and ignore that kind of stuff, but it is tricky. I try and not watch trailers as well, but because I think like trailers now just have like far too much of the movie in them, but it's quite difficult to avoid them when you're like going to the cinema. So, but yeah, I totally get what you mean. So I think actually, like, I don't know, I think we're probably roughly the same age. I think our generation probably had it better, I would say, like, had it better than what kids today have. And I'm glad that we got that experience of, like, going, like, to Blockbuster or Global Video or whatever and being able to pick up. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so with this being the first time that you've been on the Movie Duel podcast, as a sort of rule that I'm slightly sort of moving forward with, the first pick is going to be mine. So the first choice of subject was down to me, and I picked Best Paul Verhoeven Movie. So a little bit of information about Paul Verhoeven. He was born on the 18th of July 1938. He is a Dutch filmmaker, and his blending of graphic violence and sexual context with social satire is a trademark of both his drama and science fiction films. His breakthrough film was 1973's Turkish Delight, starring a young Rutger Hauer. And a few little snippets of trivia for you. For Paul Verhoeven, he became the first nominee ever to actually show up at the Razzie Awards and personally accept the awards for Worst Director and Worst Picture for Showgirls in 1995.
Hiya.
You look like shit.
She looks better than a 10-inch dick and you know it.
He considers John Landis to be his only friend in Hollywood, and his personal favourite film of his own is Starship Troopers.
Welcome to the Roughnecks.
Rico's Roughnecks!
So, from the get-go, neither of us agree with Paul Verhoeven.
No.
I
like that story about the Razzles though. That's quite endearing, actually.
Well, I don't think, you know, we'll probably get into this as we talk about our two choices, but I don't think Paul Verhoeven really gives a shit about what people think of him or his films necessarily. You know, and he's not been without controversy, again, which we'll probably talk about. But yeah, as it was my choice of subject, it meant that it was you got the first sort of choice of picking a film. Was it an easy choice for you, Vanessa?
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I love the film that I've picked. I watch it practically every year. And I do really enjoy a lot of other Paul Verhoeven movies.
What film have you picked, Vanessa?
I've picked 1992's Basic Instinct.
I like you.
You do?
Well, we got 31 stab wounds.
What was it?
Ice pick. Stay away from her.
You're dealing with someone very dangerous.
So where's this going? What do you want from me?
You just can't tell about people, can you?
Michael Douglas, Sharon Stone, Basic Instinct, rated R.
I was going to say by Paul Verhoeven, but I don't need to say that. And yeah, it was a really easy choice. I watch it every year, and to me, I've not seen all Paul Verhoeven's films. I've seen Starship Troopers, Showgirls, Total Recall, Hollow Man, Robocop as of last night, and I enjoy them all for different reasons, but this is easily my favourite, and I'll probably get into the reasons why. But yeah, for me, I would say I would be lying if I said it was a difficult choice, as much as I do enjoy. I suppose if I had to pick like my second favourite, after seeing Robocop, I would maybe put that there actually, but I really enjoyed Starship Troopers. Total Recall I haven't seen for a long time. I just remember a woman with 3 tits. That's what I remember. And Arnie's in that, isn't he?
He is, yes.
I have to hand it to you. It's the best mindfuck yet.
Yeah. But it was a long time ago that I saw Total Recall. So, Basic Instinct, obviously, stars Sharon Stone in the kind of main role as Catherine Tramiel. I say she's the star, but actually, when it came out, Michael Douglas's name, who I think is the co-star, but it was his name above the title in the posters because she was kind of unknown at the time. This was like her first big movie. It was before Casino, and at the time, this is Michael Douglas who plays Detective Nick Curran. He was quite an established actor. He'd been in War of the Roses, Fatal Attraction, which is a really similar film in a lot of ways, Wall Street, Romancing the Stone. But actually, when I was looking at his like movieography or filmography or whatever you call it, this was his, in my head, last big movie for a while, until maybe like some of the Marvel stuff. Because he's obviously been in the Ant-Man movies that have been out recently, but all these big movies seem to be kind of like 80s into the early 90s. But so I would say he was the co-star, but at the time I think it was billed that he was the star because nobody knew who Sharon Stone was. A few other folk who are in it. Now, I'm not sure how to pronounce this guy's surname. George Zunza, who plays Detective Gus Moran, who is the best detective on the show and much better than Detective Nick Curran. You've also got Jan Triplehorn as Dr. Beth Garner. I did recognise her actually. She's been in a few things. She was in The Firm. She played the wife of Tom Cruise in that John Grisham movie. Waterworld, which I've never seen. I heard it was absolute shit, but I don't know because I never saw it.
It is a pretty.
It's absolute
It's interesting to watch, but it's a bad film. That's the only thing I can think that she's been in.
She's been in a lot of TV stuff actually. If you look up her. You've got Dorothy Malone, who passed away in 2018. She plays the kind of serial killer friend, Hazel Dobkins, of Catherine Tramiel. She was a big star, apparently, like a way back in the 1950s. She was in The Big Sleep, Written on the Wind, The Fast and the Furious, not the Vin Diesel one, like the 1954 one.
The geriatric version.
Yeah. So she was quite a big star, apparently, in her day. And then you've got 2 of my favourite actors, just because of who they are and what they've been in. Wayne Knight, who plays ADA. What's that? Assistant District Attorney, is that? ADA?
Yes.
Is that assistant?
Yeah.
John Corley, who's actually not in it very much, but he played Dennis Nedry in Jurassic Park, which is one of my favourite films.
You shouldn't use my name.
Dodson! We've got Dodson here! See, nobody cares.
It came out in 1993, and a little bit of trivia, Steven Spielberg apparently saw this, liked the actor Wayne Knight so much that he stayed at the end of the premiere to speak to him so he could cast him in Jurassic Park because he thought his performance was so good. And actually, if you like, when he's in the scene, like the famous scene where they're interviewing Sharon Stone, he's like sitting sweating and he looks like so uncomfortable, and you can see how that's similar, can't you, to like the Dennis Nedry, who's like sweaty and awkward and, you know.
But it is almost like I'm pretty sure. I mean, as I normally find on streaming services, because I was watching it through something, I can't remember how I watched it, but it's hard to sort of skip back. And I'd like to put out there to anybody who operates a streaming service is please start putting in scenes like they do on DVDs or something like that, so you can skip to a scene. It would be really handy, especially for a podcaster who's reviewing films. But it's almost like that interrogation scene, and there's a lot of close-ups in that scene. And when she sort of does the leg uncrossing, recrossing kind of thing, it cuts.
Is that the bit that you were trying to find the scene?
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, that sounds really bad, doesn't it?
I was just practicing my mantra.
But it cuts to the camera's on him before and then after, and it's almost like he's sweating more afterwards.
I liked having sex with him. He wasn't afraid of experimenting. I like men like that. Men who give me pleasure. He gave me a lot of pleasure.
You ever engage in any sadomasochistic activity?
Exactly what did you have in mind, Mr. Corelli?
So I couldn't get back to sort of see if that was the case, but I was just thinking that's a really good little detail if that is the case. But I'll maybe have to look that up on YouTube.
Yeah, no, he does. He looks, and he's quite sweaty when he plays Dennis Nedry as well. So I just thought that was an interesting wee kind of trivia. He's also been in lots of other things. I'm reliably informed that he is Newman in Seinfeld, which I have never seen. Are you a Seinfeld fan? No.
No, I've never seen it.
Apparently that's like what he's most famous for. But he was also in GFK, Dirty Dancing. I do remember him in Dirty Dancing. He like gets up on stage and tells jokes and stuff at the weird camp thing that they're at. He's in Murder, She Wrote. Murder, She Wrote crops up a lot when you're looking up filmographies for people. And the other two people I was just going to very briefly mention. Mitch Pileggi. I understand on this podcast you quite like looking for X-Files actors. I'm a massive X-Files fan, and he obviously played Skinner in the X-Files. Now, I do wonder, this was pre-X-Files, and the way that he acts, he restrains Nick Curran at one point in a way that's very similar how he restrains Mulder when Mulder's kicking off about some shit that Mulder always kicks off about. And I do wonder, a bit like Wayne Knight getting cast in Jurassic Park, if he was cast as Skinner on the back of Basic Instinct, which I think would be quite interesting.
It's a very similar character. He's very, authoritarian and trying to do the right thing, so it's quite possible.
What is this? This is where you pucker up and kiss my ass.
Yeah, so I thought that was quite interesting. And the other guy that I recognised, and it was, now I'm going to muck up his surname as well, Stephen Tobolowsky, who is, well, I recognise him most from Thelma and Louise because it's like my second favourite film ever, and he plays like a kind of cop character in that as well. Single White Female, he was in Groundhog Day.
Ned! Ryerson!
And this really good TV show that I watched years ago called Murder One, I think had Stanley Tucci in it, and had a guy that was in the X-Files. I can't remember his name now. He was bald, and in the X-Files he ran
Daniel
like a detention centre.
Boreanaz.
Yes, him. He's in Murder One. You should check it out. I think it's from the early 90s, and it's like a kind of courtroom drama thing, but it's really, really good at it. And Stephen Tobolowsky is in that as well.
I remember him most from he was Sammy Jenkins in Memento, Guy Pearce film, Christopher Nolan film. He's the sort of he's what. But anyway, Guy Pearce's character uses him to remember Sammy Jenkins is his thing to pull him in to say that's what you've got kind of thing. This short-term memory loss. But yeah, he's one of them actors that's been in all sorts.
I just picked the things that I knew. There was like you said, there was like, I could have listed hundreds of things that he'd been in, but Memento I've seen. Is that the one that goes backwards? Mm-hmm. And he's got memory loss, and does he tattoo things on himself to help him remember things? Right, okay. Yeah. I have seen it, but I've not seen it for like a long, long time. But what I did was I picked out stuff that I'd kind of knew quite well. So I remember Memento being quite a good film, actually. It's just been a long, long time since I've seen him.
So when did you first see Basic Instinct?
Now, I don't actually know. It came out in 1992 and I would have been 8. As liberal as my parents were about letting me watch things before they never really cared about like what an 18 certificate was. In fact, have you ever seen The Specialist with Sharon Stone and Sylvester Stallone?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember watching that once with my dad, and I must have been, I don't know, about 14 or something, and there's like a really steamy shower sex scene in that. It was so fucking awkward. It was just one of them, where you sit, and I was like, and eventually I was like, you want a cup of tea? Because I just had to get out of the room. So I definitely saw it before I was 18. I think I probably saw it when I was around about 15 or 16, something like that. And as soon as I saw it, I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. Just thought it was amazing. Mostly because of Sharon Stone, I think. I think she's just amazing in it. I think she's so sure of herself. I mean, she's a psychopath. She's a total psychopath. And she's like a master manipulator. But I think I like that because I can't stand Michael Douglas's character. So I like the fact that she's manipulating because he's such a dick.
Like her to join us sometime?
Did she join you and Johnny?
No, Johnny felt intimidated.
Look what happened to him.
Every time I watch it, I think that more. I'm just like, why? Like, he's such a dick. And I don't know if it's because he's so easily manipulated. And, like, his friend Gus tells him, basically, like, stay away from her. She's proper trouble.
I've not seen this film a lot.
Right.
And I think I would have seen this when I was mid-teens, probably.
About the same as me, probably, then. Like, 15, 16, something like that.
And probably watched it again a few years after that. To be fair, rewatching it's probably the first time I've watched the film without having a wank, I suppose.
I said, don't disturb you, I'm cleaning my room!
Fair enough. I wish I could say the same.
Hey.
No, it's not too crude.
Lovely. There was me worrying I was going to shock you then. But yeah, I would totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's the Sharon Stone show, definitely. It's a tour de force performance from her. Yeah,
she's absolutely amazing. And as I said, this was like her first big movie. It's not as if she'd had a chance to get established at this point. And, Michael, as much as I'm saying I don't like Michael Douglas's character, I think I like Michael Douglas. I don't know, he's one of these people, because he quite often plays people I don't like. Like, he's a bit like, his name is completely escaping. Matt Damon, right? I don't like Matt Damon. And I think it's because I hated him in The Departed. So I've never really liked him since, because he played such an absolute arsehole. But then I'm like, does that not mean he's just a really good actor? Because I bought into that so much. And I think the same is true of Michael Douglas. That, like, I buy into him being an arse. And there's also another bit, actually, with the because how he's sleeping with the therapist at the start, Beth. Mm-hmm. There's a sex scene with her that's slightly questionable, I think.
Yes. Yeah,
and it makes me, you know what I mean? And I was a bit like, this is a bit... I mean, for a start, I just don't think that would happen in a film today. Like, I just don't think that would be... Or if it did, it would be part of the story. You know what I mean? But, like, watching it, I was like, okay, I don't know how I feel about that, actually. It's not great. And I just think that makes me dislike him even more, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, well, if you think about what he'd done before that, obviously... a big one is Fatal Attraction, which is a similar. It's under that sort of erotic thriller banner that this is, where he's obviously playing somebody who's cheating on his wife, or cheated on his wife, and all and then this psychopath is boiling bunnies and all sorts. And before that, I think you've got Wall Street, where he's playing an absolute bastard in that.
Yep.
He's carved that sort of niche for himself, really. And I don't think, I think Paul Verhoeven is a very clever director. Although Michael Douglas gets top billing, this film's not designed to make you like Michael Douglas.
No.
It's designed to make you like Gus.
Yeah, Gus is a hero. I mean, it's really sad what happens to Gus, but the whole time you're like, just listen to your pal. He's telling you.
I'm not afraid of her.
Why the hell not?
I don't know. I'm just not.
That's her pussy talking, it ain't your brain.
Yes, come on, Gus.
I don't know if it's just, but also he's a bit right. So there's that scene with the therapist, which is a bit rapey, right? But there's also this sense that he's like a bit of a creep. Like, obviously, when Sharon Stone's getting undressed and stuff, like she knows he's watching her, but he's still like staring at her bedroom and stuff. Like when she's, like it's still creepy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not a fan of him at all.
Well, I mean, it's like, you mentioned the sex scene with the therapist, and what kind of shocked me when I rewatched it, because I always knew that there was that sort of aggressive tinge to the scene anyway, but it shocked me actually, rewatching it, how early on it is in the film.
Yeah.
I think it's there to sort of suggest that, he's got this sort of repressed aggression, I suppose, as we learn that, he's recovering alcoholic, I suppose.
Yep.
And all these other things that have been going on during his career and his life and everything else. But yeah, he has this sort of one meeting with Sharon Stone being suggestive and showing everyone what she's got, and that's it.
Quite literally.
It flicks that switch in him. Because I know there's that in real life, Michael Douglas had like a sex addiction and stuff. So
that's right, he did. Yeah.
Whether that accounts for the lull in his career after this, I don't know. Whether he was battling that, who knows? But
Yep. Yeah, it's I read something about that scene with the therapist. Apparently, that was a rehearsal. That wasn't supposed to be the scene that was in the final film. But
Right.
It was so good, or realistic, or whatever, that they ended up using that in the final movie. Although you don't really, I mean, I'm not saying that it was right what happened in that scene, but you don't warm to her, Beth, the therapist, at all. Through the whole movie, I never thought, oh, I like her. There's also something really random when she's giving him his keys. She's got a Bart Simpson keyring on her keys, and I was like, that just seems really a weird detail, or like out of character or something. I don't know. I thought that was odd, but I wasn't a fan of hers, and I don't know if that was intentional, because ultimately you are supposed to like Sharon Stone even though she's a psychopath. So I suppose the only other lead-in woman in it you don't like, that maybe makes you more likely to. I don't know if there was any thought behind that, but
so obviously a key part of this film is sex.
Yes, probably one of the reasons that I like it so much, not just because I'm a total pervert, although I'm a little bit, but I think because of the age that I saw this, I probably hadn't seen a lot of movies not only featuring a lot of sex scenes, but actually about sex. So there's obviously quite a lot of sex scenes in it, and apparently they had like a choreographer who did the sex scenes to get them looking as sexy and whatever as they do. But I think the age that I was when I first saw it, not only didn't, like, I just wouldn't have seen film, because this film basically is about sex. It's about how Michael Douglas becomes infatuated with Sharon Stone, and it's not because she's like a good laugh down the pub, or because she's like really kind to animals or anything, is it? It's because of how she looks, and it's because, what does he say at one point, he says something like, oh, she was the fuck of the century or something. It is all about sex. Interestingly, I read that, I don't know if it was an early screenplay or something, originally that character was supposed to be played by a woman, so it was going to be Sharon Stone and a female cop, because there is this element in the film that Sharon Stone's character is bisexual. She's obviously got this girlfriend, Roxy.
At the end of the day, the film's about Catherine's manipulation of people, all these different people that she's getting something from.
Yes. And Roxy's character, it is revealed, isn't it, that she also is a murderer, like the old lady Hazel Dawkins. Does she not kill her brothers or something on a farm and she's young?
Yeah.
So obviously, I think that, as you say, Catherine Trammell's character, Sharon Stone's character, Catherine Trammell, it's easy to manipulate people if they're already vulnerable in some way. And I think even Nick Curran's vulnerable, even though he's a dick. Yeah. He's obviously got substance abuse issues, he's got alcohol issues, he has got guilt over this accidental shooting of these tourists, he's got anger management issues. So yeah, I do think that's a little bit unfair. What I had read was more about the fact that, to start with, the fact she was bisexual was like a really big part of her character, and that was kind of eroded away. Although I don't know how successful the film would have been in 1992 had Nick Curran's character been played by a woman. Although I suppose there's that. Have you seen that film Bound?
Yeah.
And it's two women. But I mean, people don't know that like the way that they know this movie. And then also, does it become just a little bit of kind of like fantasy for, you know what I mean? Does it lose a bit of what the actual film is about? But I thought I did think that was quite interesting.
Just as an aside, something you mentioned a little bit earlier actually, about the intimacy coach. I suppose it's an early version of an intimacy coach on film. I'd read somewhere, and this is another X-Files connection.
Ooh.
Whilst acting as a body double in this film, pornographic actress called Ashlyn Gear, I believe, acted as body double for Sharon Stone in some of the scenes. She was in an episode of The X-Files called Blood in season 2.
Is she the woman that is worried about getting raped and kills the mechanic? Cool.
She is. So 2. So
many X-Files. You can, 6 degrees of the X-Files. You could do 3 degrees of the X-Files. You don't even need to do 6 degrees.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot. I think, Paul Verhoeven's films, on the surface, and to somebody who maybe doesn't really pay attention to them, can look very schlocky and very just cheap and full of sex and violence and everything else. There's so much depth to these characters, even, your Roxy's and your the old lady that she befriends, and, even Gus. Yep. They've all got these little sort of niche performances by the actors that really sort of add to the film.
Yeah, even what we were saying earlier about Wayne Knight, the fact that he's getting sweatier and sweatier and he looks more and more uncomfortable with I don't know what you call that scene, the fanny flashing scene. Is that the best way to describe it? I don't know. Even just tiny little things like that, I think are really good. And as much as I don't like Michael Douglas's character, I do think you buy into the fact that him and Gus are really good friends.
Yes.
Because Gus is really looking out for him. And the scene where, I really like the scene where Nick Curran goes to pick Gus up from that kind of cowboy bar, and then they go and Gus is steaming drunk, so he has to get some coffee and some pie or whatever to sober up. And you really do buy into the fact that they are really, really good friends, even though Nick's a dick. So I do quite like that. Like you said, even though if you think about it, Gus probably isn't on screen that much. One, he's like the hero of the whole thing, and two, you do actually you buy into even Roxy.
You're looking for Catherine, not me.
Who are you?
I'm Roxy. I'm her friend.
You don't see much of her. You buy the fact that her, she is also infatuated with Catherine, as is Michael Douglas's character. Even though she's not on screen very much, you do buy that. So there is a, like you said, if you just look at it on the surface, it's just a movie with a lot of sex. I mean, Paul Verhoeven and I have noticed, and I think I've written something down about this for Robocop as well. I don't think I've seen a Paul Verhoeven film that doesn't have tits in it. And from the surface, you could say this is just a director that likes leering over women or whatever.
Don't get me wrong. I don't doubt that he enjoys those sorts of things. He's Dutch at the end of the day,
They like the naked beaches and stuff, don't they?
Yeah, so, He is definitely, he has these. He's definitely a provocateur. He looks.
Yeah.
I think he gives all of his films the right sort of tone. I think sometimes people get them and sometimes they don't. It's like with Showgirls, which was completely panned, and it's not a great film. There's some really poor choices in it, but it's what it's sort of saying about it. It's something like Starship Troopers. Not to go too off kilter, but it's very easy to look at that film and see that it has a happy ending. And to me, I've never seen it as a happy ending because it's people falling into this sort of fascist state and accepting it and being positive about it. And all of his films have that sort of clever subtext. That satire really is what he's famous for. It's almost Basic Instincts is almost better if you know more about Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah. Although, when I first watched this, I wouldn't even have been able to tell you who Paul Verhoeven was. Mm-hmm. Although probably what attracted me to the film in the first place, as I said, was just this amazing kind of femme fatale manipulating people round about her, especially stupid male cops. But it is a cautionary tale because although you don't see it at the end of the movie, Nick Curran is going to get ice picked to death. Mm-hmm. He's going to get killed. They're going to be shagging somewhere, high on cocaine, and he's going to get killed. So it's like and he's lost his best friend. Yeah. He's lost that other cop guy that I don't think he liked very much, but still a colleague. The therapist who he was close to, she's dead. So
he
to
shot
me,
her.
it is like a yeah, exactly. So to me, it is like a cautionary tale because he goes after what he wants without giving a fuck about anything else. He basically, just to be crude, just follows his dick. Doesn't listen to his friend, doesn't listen to his therapist. But then obviously it's just alluded to at the end. But then it is alluded to that will get him killed and has got most of his friends killed. So the subtext for me would be that, you shouldn't just, if you're infatuated with somebody, maybe you should take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, what am I doing? Is there anything else about this person other than the fact that they're devastatingly good looking and really good at sex? Is that going to sustain a relationship for 40 years? Probably not. So I think there is a subtext that I probably didn't think about when I first saw this. But as you say, with Starship Troopers, it's maybe a little bit more obvious because I think the guy that wrote the original story or the script that Starship Troopers was based on was a fascist who loved war, and then it was twisted. And it works so well as basically saying, how awful all those things are. It works as satire. I wouldn't say this is satire, but I still think there's a kind of moral of the story at the end of it, basically.
Definitely. To me, and it's a problem I've always had with the film, is that Michael Douglas has no right to survive in this film.
Don't you want to see him die? Do you want to see that at the end? Right, yes. Okay. So
Because in that second sort of major... Well, no... I suppose it's their first sex scene, that sort of midpoint. It's teased that she's reaching back to get the ice pick and she's not, she just throws herself forward. So it's already teased, and then you have that tease again.
Yeah.
And I suppose maybe that's the twist or the shock, is that you're expecting her to now get the ice pick and stab him to death, which, just to sort of touch on and sort of flip to the beginning of the film, that ice picking is brutal. Absolutely
it's so much more brutal than I remembered, even though I watch this annually. When you're watching something, I think critically you pick up stuff that you just do not pick up when you're just watching for enjoyment. And I thought in the first few minutes, oh my god, there's so much blood, this is really, really brutal. It is a really brutal killing. I don't know, I quite like the way it ends, although it is a bit of a double bluff, like you said, because you've seen her twice when they're having sex, when you think so would it be better even if you just saw her grab the ice pick and then it ended? You don't necessarily have to see him get an ice pick to death, but say she picked up the ice pick and then it just ended at that point, at least you know he's definitely going to die. Although I think in the really rubbish sequel, which we'll not talk about because it's pretty shit, but I'm pretty sure it's alluded to in that, or it's spoken about, I can't remember because I've only watched it once, that he is dead because she's in London at that point manipulating somebody else. But I think, they could have gone slightly further with it than they did, because it almost is like a second fake out, and I sometimes don't like when films do that. It's like, I can't think of another instance, but I've definitely seen it in other films where they do it and then you think, and then they do it again and you're like, right, okay, it was quite good the first time round, but the second time round you're kind of taking the piss a little bit. Like, either just do it or don't do it. Yeah,
I mean, it's a very lush film as well visually. I think you've got these sort of San Francisco landscape shots look absolutely amazing, and it's probably not something you see a lot of with Paul Verhoeven, but then that's generally because he makes more science fiction films that are maybe
dystopian futures and all metal and stuff like. I thought the shots where they were driving along the kind of cliff edge and stuff were stunning. Do you know what else I thought when I watched it this time? The music is amazing. I think it's a Jerry Goldsmith score, and like those bits when they're driving, like the kind of cat and mouse chase thing, and the music even right at the end where you do think he's going to get stabbed when they're having sex. Like the music there, even like kind of comes to a climax or whatever. The music's really good. It really complements the movie, I think, definitely.
There's a really good shot as well. I think it's this sort of club/church thing that he goes to sort of search out Catherine, and that looks really stunning. There's this sort of dolly shot over the top, and it comes down to Michael Douglas looking completely out of place.
It looks ridiculous.
It looks like somebody's dad trying to coming to pick somebody up.
It looks, but do you know what though? And I don't know if this is just because I'm so old. I watch that now and I think that club looks awful. Like that is like my idea of purgatory, going into a club like that. It just looks horrendous. Give me an old man's pub anytime. Like, but you're right. He does look really out of place.
It's a very Hollywood club where everybody's sort of really sexy and rubbing up against each other and dancing seductively when maybe that's an American thing. I mean, I'm sure, over here it's, people puking in the corner and probably somebody getting fingered up against the bar. So that's the best that we get. Aye.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it's just a bit cooler. But to me, it did not look like my idea of fun at all. It just looked. But you're right. He looked totally out of place. But I think that's intentional. I think he's supposed to feel like inferior to her, like, because he obviously goes through and she's in the toilet with Roxy and some guy and they're taking drugs and she kicks the door shut. Like, it's just more manipulation. One thing I was going to mention as well, like I think it's the night they first have sex, and the next day he's all like, oh, it's the fuck of the century, he's all obsessed and whatever, and she's like, and it was all right.
Do you really think it was so special?
I told her I thought it was the fuck of the century. Well, what do you think?
I thought it was a pretty good beginning.
She's just like whatever.
That's such a man thing, I think.
Definitely. I thought that was good.
There's a few bits in here that I sort of made notes on. The amount of cum stains on the mattress.
That was horrendous. That really made me feel quite ill.
The maid needs firing, for starters. Jesus Christ.
That was just, I was like, what? No, that made me feel a little bit sick, actually. That wasn't nice.
Yeah, the less said about that, the better.
Yes.
Why does she have a pen name for her book, but then have a picture on the back?
Our books have got their shittest name as well, right? One of the books is called Love Hurts. I think it's the book about somebody killing a rock star where she basically tells them what she's going to do. And it's called Love Hurts. I was like, that is the shittest name for a book. If I saw that on the shelf, right, I'm a big reader. There is no way I'd be picking that up. But is the pen name not also Catherine? It's only not half a pen name. I can't remember that either, but yeah, you've got a fair point. Why put your picture on the back and then use the pen name? And why call your book Love Hurts?
And another sort of black mark on Nick Curran's police career. It's got to be the worst surveillance ever. Just going through somebody's gate and standing in front of their broadly windowed house and just standing there. How she didn't sit up. Well, she probably did see him and just carried on anyway, but he's not even attempting to hide behind anything. He's just stood there in full light watching her get undressed.
Yeah, it is creepy. Although I do think that she knows he's watching her and she's enjoying that and she's putting on a show, but I still think it's really, really creepy. Did you notice, by the way, this is slightly off on a tangent, but did you notice what movie was on when Nick was passed out?
Yes, that's my next note, Hellraiser.
Sorry to steal your thunder. And I was like, that's an interesting choice, actually, because Hellraiser, while being a very different movie, in my mind, is also very much about sex.
Mm-hmm.
So
totally.
I wonder if that was an intentional wee Easter egg, because, like I said, although it is different, it's definitely got similar themes.
Yeah, well, it's a film all about lust and desire and what you do to get that back, you know.
Uncle Frank,
yeah.
Uncle Frank.
Kirsty, it's Frank. It's Uncle Frank.
No.
You remember?
No.
Come to Daddy.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you'd like to talk about with regards to
I'll
Basic
just
Instinct?
quickly look at my notes. I think we've probably covered most of it. Smoking. Now, I don't know if this is because I'm a smoker. I'm not a heavy smoker, but I do smoke occasionally when I'm having a glass of wine. But I think smoking is such a lost art in movies, and cigarette is such a good prop. It's like, in this movie, if she didn't smoke, I actually don't think it'd be as good a film. I mean, obviously you get the great lines where she says, like, what are you going to do, charge me with smoking, when she gets told she's not allowed to smoke. But it's just she's just, I don't know what it is about it. It's really sexy, but it's also, I speak, sometimes my brother speaks about this as well, he's really into movies, that it is like a lost thing, because nowadays people just do not smoke. And maybe occasionally get people smoking in movies, but if you do, they tend to be like villains rather than, or they tend to be like really trying to portray really working class people or whatever.
It's they're smoking for a purpose.
Yeah,
in a film.
Whereas in old movies, when you see people just smoking because that's what they did, I just think it's, you know, it's something that's really, and I'm not saying smoking's cool, I just think it looks really cool in movies. I think it's a good prop, and it makes her sexier, and then it gives her good lines, like, what you're going to do, charge me with smoking, which he then repeats later because he's an idiot and he hasn't got any crack of his own, so he has to steal hers. But I just think the smoking in this is fantastic, and I don't know if I've got any more to say in it. I mean, I could sit for ages and just go on about how much I like it, but that's probably a bit boring. But
well, we're both big X-Files fans as well, so we know that smoking makes the best villains.
It does make the best villains. Although he never smoked actual cigarettes, apparently it was herbal cigarettes. And I don't know if you ever noticed when he smoked, he used to smoke and take like 2 draws and then put it out, and I would be like, I don't know how cheap cigarettes were back in like the 90s in America.
Well, the man lived in the shadows. He was probably fucking loaded, so he just didn't care.
He probably was. And yet he's still alive, apparently, according to the most recent series. He's still going strong, despite the 100 fag a day habit that he had.
And being blown up by missiles from an Apache helicopter.
Oh, he got killed a few times. He was a bit like a cat, wasn't he?
Yeah, but not blown up. Anyway, we're getting way off track. Okay,
we could probably talk about the X-Files for a while, so better to bring it back.
Okay, right. So that's probably a good time to call it a break, and we'll come back after the intermission. Okay, so welcome to the intermission, ladies and gentlemen. This is the part of the podcast where I ask my co-host a random question, a question they've not prepared for, and get their genuine first answer. So are you ready, Vanessa?
I have no idea. Hopefully.
Okay.
Depends what you ask.
So here is your question. What is your favourite line from any movie?
Okay, this is quite hard, because I like a lot of lines in a lot of movies.
You've got to go with what comes into your head first.
What came into my head first was Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2. Although I'm probably going to cock up the line now that I've said that. Is it I need your boots, your clothes, and your motorcycle? Is that right? Is that right?
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
That's it. And it's because, well, when I get drunk sometimes I put on the accent and say it. And also because I was at an airport once and the guy going through security was like, I need your boots and your belt, and he had that kind of, I think he must have been like Romanian or something, he had that kind of accent, which just cracked me up. But Terminator 2 is one of those movies that I just absolutely adore. It's just a masterpiece, and it's very quotable. There's quite a lot of quotable lines actually in Terminator 2, that's not the only one. But it's the one, it's not like in my top 5, top 10 movies. And I'm weird, so I do think about what my top 10 movies are. It is probably in my top 20 or 30, but I just think there's absolutely nothing wrong with Terminator 2. It's one of those movies that you can, and it's one of those movies you can, like, it comes on sometimes late at night, and like ITV2 or whatever when you come in from the pub, and you can just put it on.
Do you know what? It's one of those films that's randomly never on any streaming services. You'll get Terminator, and you'll get Terminator 3 and Salvation and all those. Terminator 2's never on any of them, ever.
But I think one of the TV channels must have the rights to it, because I've definitely caught it on like ITV2 or ITV3 or one of these random channels. So I don't know how these things work anymore, to be honest, but I do wonder if one of these channels is somehow blocking any of the streaming services from getting it. But it's really weird, I've seen Terminator 1, I think once, maybe twice. I've seen Terminator 2 at least 20 times, I would say, probably over the years. So yeah, that's the first one that came to my mind. Like I said, it's not necessarily one of my absolute favourite films, but it's a very quotable film, and I just don't think there's nothing in Terminator 2 that I would change. I think it's perfect.
I think one that sort of pops into my head thinking about it now is from The Big Lebowski, because it's just something that generally sort of pops up in my real life, and I'll say to people, somebody will say something, I'll say, well, that's just your opinion, man.
You know, it's a film I've not seen for ages, but it definitely started the White Russian craze. There's actually a pub, it might be a chain, so maybe it's everywhere, I don't know, but there's a pub in Edinburgh called Lebowski's, and all they sell is like different types of White Russians.
Cool. Okay, so the folks are coming back from the foyer, and we shall end the intermission and get back to the main podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my choice for best Paul Verhoeven movie was Robocop from 1987.
We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you Robocop.
This guy's really good.
He's not a guy, he's a machine.
Old Detroit has a cancer. Cancer is crime.
Let the woman go. You are under arrest.
You better back up, pal!
Your move, creep.
Robocop, the future of law enforcement.
Obviously directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, and Miguel Ferrer. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm not quite sure, but we'll go with that. In a dystopic and crime-ridden Detroit, a terminally wounded cop returns to the force as a powerful cyborg haunted by submerged memories. So, Robocop was one of these films, and we sort of touched on this with Basic Instinct. It was probably one of those films that I saw far too young. Not that it made a difference to who I am or anything like that, but it's pure sort of Paul Verhoeven ultra-violence. It's still got that. A massive amount of social satire to it. It's written by Ed Neumeier and Michael Miner, who sort of merged two sort of concepts together One of them had this idea about a cop that was injured in the line of duty. He gets hooked up to an appliance that makes him this sort of super cop, and the other had this idea of a robot that was built for the police force, basically. So they sort of joined forces, put their concept together. But it was always entitled Robocop, which really sort of made it a struggle to get a director, because they felt that it wasn't given a fair sort of shake because of its title. Very sort of throwaway, sort of cheap, low budget kind of title. But it was eventually offered to Mr. Paul Verhoeven, and this was his second Hollywood picture, I suppose. It's his second English language film after Flesh and Blood, which I haven't seen. But he was very much the same. He thought, Robocop, that just sounds like a big pile of shit, and threw it in the bin. It wasn't until his wife picked it up out of the bin, read it, and said, look, there's probably a bit more to this film than you think, and you need to think about the subtext. So he reread it and decided that he wanted this to be his next project. It was filmed in Dallas as a substitute for Detroit due to its modern looking buildings. They sort of decided that Detroit wasn't the right place, didn't look modern enough, and decided to shoot in Dallas. So Vanessa, what's your sort of history with Robocop? I think you said that you'd not seen it before last night.
Well, I thought I'd seen it, and I don't know if it's just one of those movies. You know, there was a lot of robotic films. You know, there was like Terminator and Terminator 2. There was like Demolition Man, Robocop. There was probably loads of others that I can't think of off the top of my head. And I don't know if I've just kind of amalgamated some of them in my head. So I might have seen bits of it, but I definitely hadn't sat down and watched the whole movie until last night for this podcast.
Cool.
And I was very impressed.
Well, I've seen it multiple times, probably as much as you've seen Basic Instinct. And it's always a film that sort of stuck with me. Like I say, I think I probably saw it probably a bit too young, because it doesn't hold back on a lot of things, violence being one of them. And they were things that sort of stuck with me. I wouldn't say scared me, but it definitely stuck with me through many years until I saw it again. I would hazard a guess that I saw this when I was around 10, 11 maybe. But, you know, as a film, it's just so taut. It just keeps... You know, there's no opening credits, so you don't get a big, long, sprawling opening credit sequence. It's city, skyline, Robocop, bam. You're into this this newsreel that sort of goes in and out of the film. It's a reasonable sort of staple of Paul Verhoeven's films, or a lot of his bigger films. Total Recall, there's a little bit of it. Again, in Starship Troopers, there's a lot of this cutting away to news reports, adverts, things like that. But this news report, it basically sets up the film. It tells you everything you need to know about what's going on in Detroit. The police are talking about strikes due to the number of police officers that are dying on the streets and being killed, and the fact that this company OCP has bought out the police force. It's basically running the police force now. It sets up this sort of corporate storyline, you know, the big business buying out the police force, thinking all about profits. It's all set up nice and neatly for you in the first 5 minutes of the film. You get to experience what's going on with the police force. We're introduced quite early on to Peter Weller as Alex Murphy on his first day in a new precinct. Very clear that he's come from a nicer area and maybe not quite as dangerous as where he's moved to. I think it's Metro South, I think they call it, something like that. Or he's moved from north to south, something like that. But it sets up the fact, you know, he's a family man, he's got a son, tells you about the fact that his son likes this character, TJ Laser, I think it's called, and what he does with his gun, which obviously becomes quite important later on. And we get introduced to a few other characters in the sort of police department. I'm probably going to butcher his name. Robert DeQuee, who is in this film as Sergeant Reed, which is really one of the standout sort of minor characters in this film. He plays it just right. He's sort of battling this big corporation that's now running the police force, but he's sort of towing the line as well, and you can tell that he's massively frustrated at the whole thing. Comes out with one of my favourite lines in the film, which is...
Your client's a scumbag. You're a scumbag, and scumbags see the judge on Monday morning.
And then Nancy Allen, who plays Anna Lewis, who's really playing against type. You know, by this sort of point, she played very sort of bitchy or sort of very sort of humble characters. Obviously, a big role was Carrie, where she played the main sort of...
The bully.
But yes, the bully. But she's very convincing in this film. You know, she comes across as a woman that can handle herself, and the introductory scene of hers is very convincing.
Yeah, I thought she was great, and when I looked her up, I did recognise her straight away, but it was only when I looked her up that I realised that she played, I think the character's called Chris.
Yes.
Somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I think Carrie is one of the best Stephen King adaptations, and she's really good, and I mean, you really hate her in that movie.
Oh, I'd agree, yeah.
Yeah, but when I looked, she's in the sequels to Robocop. She's in Out of Sight, which was George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, I think. Poltergeist 3, which I've never seen. And Dressed to Kill, which I really want to see, but I haven't seen yet. But I thought she was very well cast, although, like you said, definitely playing against type. But I really liked her character. I think she was quite a warm character.
Yeah, she is good in Dressed to Kill. It's one of those films that's probably in 2023 is a little bit troublesome, but it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that you've got to kind of watch it knowing when it was made, kind of thing. But yeah, it's on the ever-growing list of movies I need to watch.
And then we get the sort of flip side, the sort of introduction to this big corporation, OCP, becomes a major part of the Robocop canon. Omni Consumer Products. We learn that the goal of OCP is to get on top of policing in the area, specifically Metro West or East or whatever it is, basically to make way for Delta City, which is their big futuristic sort of vision of a city. But obviously later on we find out that they're basically paying criminals to devalue the land almost, and force the police to be sold to them to run and buy their weaponry and basically rebuild the city. It's the subtext of this film, really. You know, we mentioned that there's a lot of subtext and satire to Paul Verhoeven's films, and this one's really based around what they call Reaganomics, which is obviously Ronald Reagan, president in the United States at the time, very much led to the sort of widening of the income gap in America, and this sort of... It led to the birth of yuppies, I suppose, is the general term. You know, these Wall Street banker types, these sort of... American
Psycho types.
Yes, Patrick Bateman types, yes.
I have to return some videotapes.
You know, it was very much an increase in defence spending in America. Greed, really, is
good.
What it's all about. Greed is
Gordon
good.
Gekko,
yes.
Michael Douglas, that was his slogan, was it not?
Exactly. So we get introduced to our first yuppie, which is Miguel Ferrer, who plays Bob Morton, who's basically the father of Robocop. It's his idea. He's a very sort of middling character. I think they try to make you feel sort of empathy for him, especially towards the end of his sort of arc in the story. But he's really just a massive scumbag, bootlicking, arse kissing, whatever you want to call it, all over the shop. But he just he doesn't give a shit about Alex Murphy or the little person within Detroit or anything like that. He's just a bastard, like most of the people on this corporate side of the film.
Yeah, I didn't really have any sympathy for him. I thought the way that he treated Alex Murphy when he was kind of like morphing into Robocop. You know the scene where you see it all from Alex Murphy's perspective when he's kind of being born into Robocop. Well, not just him actually, they all were bastards. They're all partying for New Year and stuff, and like without having a thought for this poor guy. And and there's the stuff with it. I think it's supposed to be 2 sex workers and the cocaine, and he's just like throwing cocaine about. And I wasn't a fan of his character. He's in you're a Twin Peaks fan?
Yes, he's Albert Rosenstein.
There's 2 people in this that were in Twin Peaks. One of the gang, Leon Nash, played by Ray Wise, who's Leland Palmer. This is all really fresh in my mind because I'm watching Twin Peaks for the first time. I'm on season 2, so I thought that was quite interesting that there was 2 separate ties to Twin Peaks, both playing quite different characters in this as well compared to who they play in Twin Peaks, but I thought they were both actually quite well cast.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I've seen Miguel Ferrer in a handful of things, and he's always pretty solid in those. Even when he's doing comedy, I always remember him from Hot Shots Part 2.
Oh, yeah.
He's in that, and I always remember him in that. He sadly passed away quite young, actually.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right.
Yeah, it was he passed away before they released Twin Peaks: The Return, which he was part of. There was a slew of people who died that were in Twin Peaks: The Return, that died not long after they put that out, which is really sad. But yeah, he's pretty solid in most things that he's in. You've also got Ronnie Cox, who plays Dick Jones, and he's another one who's playing against type because he was very much sort of wholesome family man. He was in Deliverance, who was playing the sort of conscience of that group that go out into the woods, and this is his first sort of big villain role, which he pulls off pretty well. He would actually go on to repeat the villain role for Verhoeven in Total Recall as well.
Oh, yep.
But in this introduction to OCP, we also get our first glimpse of the enforcement droid 209, which is nicknamed Ed 209 during this boardroom meeting, and it's our first sort of introduction to Verhoeven's ultra-violence as well. This is one of the scenes that really stuck with me as a very young man. I mean, it's ridiculously over the top. Obviously, Mr. Kinney, as his character's name is asked to demonstrate the Ed 209's enforcement capabilities, to point a gun at it, and for it to show how it would act as sort of this urban pacification, police the streets, basically. I mean, it's just ridiculously over the top. This thing is a tank. It's basically got 2 massive cannons on its arms and rocket launchers, and they're sort of selling it as it's going to police the streets in this new Detroit Delta City.
Yeah.
And I mean, this, I can't imagine that you would have watched last night the director's cut of this film, but I definitely watched the director's cut when I first watched this, because there's extra parts to this sort of accident, I suppose. I mean, it's pretty brutal as it is, even in the theatrical cut. You know, he's sort of blown away in this sort of hail of massive caliber bullets coming from these cannons. In the director's cut, it keeps going and going and going, and it's just at least another 30 seconds of him just laid on this table, being just pulverised by the bullets coming from Ed 209. And that was one of the things that really affected me when I was a kid. But then when you watch it with sort of adult eyes, or adult ears even, it's followed by the comment of,
Somebody want to call a goddamn paramedic? Let's go, Johnson! Which
is completely ridiculous. It's like, this guy's just been blown away. He's quite clearly dead. And then you get a line a bit later on from Dick Jones's, which is, you know, who cared if it worked or not? This is a product. This is something that's designed to show the people that we are doing something to make the streets safer. It doesn't matter if it fucking kills people or anything like that. It's this corporate greed just showing that they don't give a shit.
No, I was just going to say, OCP are the real baddies though in the movie, because when you first, like, obviously because it was like a fresh watch for me, you know, when you see Alex Murphy's character getting killed by the gang led by Clarence, is it Boddicker? Fantastic name for a villain, by the way. Thought that was a really good name. You know, you're led to believe that they are going to be the villain of the piece, and really they're just kind of dog's bodies for OCP. So as you say, there is definitely this kind of it's not even an undertone, it's not as subtle as that, it's more obvious about corporate greed and like you said, like not really caring for the little man and just wanting to make money, step on whoever you need to make that money, which is quite interesting, especially when you think about when it came out. But even though that was almost 30 years ago, I mean, it still applies today. And even when the police were striking,
absolutely, yeah.
Obviously we're living in Britain just now. I mean, there's literally strikes happening weekly, And it's not just, you know, I think people like train drivers or railway workers have striked before, but like nurses are striking and ambulance staff are striking. People who's never, I mean, I don't remember them ever striking. And no. Don't think the police in this country are allowed to strike, but a lot of it definitely, and obviously the people are striking in this country is not to do with some big corporate overlord, although I suppose it kind of is. Actually, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's funny that this was made almost 30 years ago, and yet a lot of the themes you're looking at going, that definitely still applies today, under a different guise, yeah.
Just before we move on from Ed 209, I just wanted to mention Phil Tippett, who was the stop motion animator for this film. He worked on a lot of big films, Star Wars mainly, was his big sort of claim to fame, but he did the stop motion for Ed 209. There's a couple of scenes with a stop motion Robocop as well. But I've always been a big fan of stop motion animation. I think it's very creepy.
Yeah.
You always sort of Clash of the Titans and the Harryhausen kind of films. I always found it creepy, and a big fan of it. But it's really quite good in this film as well. I think it's towards the end of its sort of use within film before sort of CGI took over. But I think Phil Tippett, he's a big fan of detail. I mean, there's details within the animation a bit later on in the film when there's the big showdown with Robocop and Ed 209, and there's this scene on the stairs, and it's wanting to obviously follow Robocop down the stairs, but it sort of takes this step. It tries its foot on the step before it goes flying down, and eventually throws this sort of tantrum at the bottom because it can't get up, and it's just like a sort of turtle that's been flipped on its shell. I just wanted to mention that because I'm a big fan of Phil Tippett. He actually did the original idea for Jurassic Park was that they were going to be stop motion before they decided to go with CGI. So if you watch, there's quite an interesting documentary. I think it's on DVD extras, and it's got the scenes with the stop motion velociraptors and things like that. Quite an interesting watch. It wouldn't have been as impactful as it was eventually, but it's quite interesting to watch. But then we got our first introduction to this. To the gang, obviously, as you mentioned, Clarence Bodicker, the leader, the sort of cop killer, as they call it in the film, and he's one of the shining stars of this film. Kurtwood Smith is just fantastic. He really makes you hate the character. He's such a good actor. He's been in a handful of things here and there, but I would say this is probably his most famous role. I think this is what a lot of people remember him for. You know, even though he's just a pawn in the story, he's there. He's being manipulated by this big corporation, Dick Jones mainly. But he's just vicious, he's cold-blooded, toys with all of his victims all the way through this film. He's got probably the most memorable lines in this film. You know, even from his first sort of scene, you know, where they're being chased down by Murphy and Lewis. And he throws one of his colleagues out of the van with pretty sinister.
Can you fly, Bobby?
And Kurtwood Smith, obviously, is another X-Files connection. Our third one of the episode. He was in season 3's Grotesque, where he played a character called Bill Patterson. He was a sort of mentor for Mulder. This episode reasonably memorable. It's not one of the greatest, but it's centered around gargoyles and paintings and sculptures. Some really eerie stuff.
He was in that 70s show as well.
Something I've never watched, to be honest.
That's where I recognised him from, because I kept thinking it wasn't the X-Files, surprisingly, but that's not an episode. Like, I rewatch the X-Files all the time, but sometimes I only rewatch the episodes that I really like, and that Grotesque, I do remember it with the gargoyles, but it's not one of my favourites. But in that 70s show, he plays the dad, and it's a very different character than what he plays here. He's obviously got quite a good range, but I thought like you said, I thought he was brilliant.
And then the rest of his gang, you've got Paul McCrane, plays Emil. He's reasonably sort of pivotal to the plot in a lot of places, but he's also another X-Files connection. Our fourth one of the episode. He plays the eponymous Leonard Betts in the episode of the same name, season 5. A really vital episode within the canon of the X-Files. A very good episode I would recommend to anybody who's never seen the series before. It's one of the Monster of the Week episodes. But it's obviously the one where we learn that Scully's got cancer, which becomes a massive arc to the overall story for the X-Files.
Yeah, definitely. It is a really good episode in itself, like you said, but it's so important. And it's not even definitely confirmed she's got cancer, is it? It's just because he goes after her, and he only goes after people, doesn't he, that have got cancer. But as you say, that becomes really pivotal. So he looks quite different in this with his kind of ginger ponytail. He's not instantly recognisable.
He's got quite a wide range, really, to be fair, because I think he was in ER as well. I think he was quite a central character in that as well. And then, as you mentioned, you've got Ray Wise, who plays Leon Nash. He was Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks.
Oh, nosy dotes and little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't you?
Jesse DeGoins, who plays Joe, who's this sort of henchman that laughs a lot.
That's pretty much all he does, isn't it?
That's pretty much all he does, yeah. But you've got this, then this sort of moves it into this really pivotal scene, the execution of Alex Murphy, really. And it is an execution, you know. He's sort of cornered by this gang, and all armed with shotguns. They just take aim and fire while Clarence Boddicker sort of sits back and waits for it to be done. But it's just brutal. It's non-stop. They don't stop firing. Again, this is another sort of scene that's really bumped up by the director's cut, because there's at least another 30 seconds of them, you know, firing away at Murphy, and, you know, more and more blood packs just firing off his body.
Yeah, it's brutal.
You know, even in the theatrical cut, it displays the sort of the pain and the anguish that he's going through before, you know, Boddicker just, you know, shoots him in the head and puts him out of his misery. It seems like a good time to sort of mention Paul Verhoeven's sort of thinking behind this scene, and the whole film really is that it's a massive sort of allegory for Jesus Christ. You know, he's executed, he's resurrected. There's even a scene towards the end when he has his final sort of showdown with Clarence Boddicker in this steelworks, where he's walking across this shallow sort of pond, and it looks like he's walking on water. He went really big on this allegory that it's about execution and resurrection.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I never actually thought of that. But even, like, because he gets shot in the hand, doesn't he? So it's a bit like the kind of crucifixion stuff.
It's also that the hand that is blown off is the hand that kills Clarence Boddicker at the end.
Ah, I didn't clock that, right, okay. It's very gory, that bit with a hand. I don't know, because it's more of a kind of sci-fi movie than like a horror movie. I was quite shocked at just how brutal that bit, like you said, the execution, but specifically when he's getting his hand blown off, and then I think he gets his arm blown off. And then there's a bit later with, I just want to call him Leonard Betts, but is it Emil with the toxic waste? You know, when his skin melts off. There's quite a lot of body horror in this, actually, that I wasn't expecting.
Oh, definitely, yeah. This is the ultra-violence, you know. Verhoeven's said, you know, he just enjoys it. He likes it. He thinks it's over the top, so it becomes almost comical in places, and it does, especially with Emil later on. But you get this sort of scene where they're trying to revive and save his life and all that, and his life flashing before his eyes. But then you get no exposition after that. It's literally cut to Robocop vision.
Yeah.
This is, you know, it doesn't need to tell you any more than that. You get these sort of snippets of scenes where Bob Morton's saying, somebody says that they've saved the arm. You're like, no, just get rid of it. No sort of feeling for this thing retaining any kind of humanity or anything like that. But it's a very short sort of snippets of scenes that fill us in. And I think this is what the film's really good at. You know, even at the start, you know, you get these news reports fill us in on what's going on. It sets the scene. Here, it very quickly, in the space of probably 2-3 minutes, shows us that he's died, they've revived him, and he's a robot. So it's very sort of sleek movie making, really.
The whole movie's very sleek, I found. Watching it last night, there isn't any of it that drags.
No.
You know, it felt very succinct. Like you said, it shows you quite a lot without really going on too long. You know what's happening. It starts quite suddenly, it ends quite suddenly, and to me there wasn't really any point that I thought, I'm a bit bored, or do you know what I mean? It does.
Yeah.
It zips along really, really well. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
And then we get our first look at the finished sort of product, really. There's a clear point in this film where he's told, or we're told, that he is a product. He's a thing. He belongs to OCP. This sort of Robocop design was made by Rob Bottin, who's famous for some really big special effects films. The Thing, for starters. The Howling. Actually had quite a difficult relationship with Paul Verhoeven during the making of this film. There was a point where he didn't want to come down to the set. He would just stay in his workshop, leave the whole sort of dressing of Paul Weller to what they called the Robo team, just because he had this massive fallout with Verhoeven. But it didn't stop him, having a working relationship with Verhoeven. He worked on Total Recall and Basic Instinct as well, as a special effects, the main sort of special effects guy. But you get this, when you get this sort of final vision of Robocop, it looks just so good. I think it looks like something that would function, something that would be realistic almost. I think it helps that Peter Weller's quite a slender guy. He's not bulky, so it's not like they had to add bulk to the suit or anything like that, so it doesn't look too ridiculously over the top.
Yeah.
Weller worked with a mime artist once he knew that he got the role, so that they could work on his movements and how they wanted that to work. Completely went to shit once he got into the suit because it limited his movement, and they had to sort of stop production and give him time to work on that. But yeah, it looks so good. I think when you think about other costumes, especially in the 80s, that are probably much more over the top, this just looks like it would work.
Yeah. No, it does. It looks fantastic. Even looking back in it now, I actually read something when I was looking this film up, that apparently the costume was so big that he couldn't get in the car.
Mm-hmm.
So the shots when he's in the car, when you see him from like the waist up, apparently he's got like half the outfit on and he's sitting in his boxers
Yeah.
and stuff. But actually, if you think about it, there's no way that costume would get in a car.
No.
But I found that quite funny, the idea of him sitting there with like half the Robocop outfit on.
Well, he
and his underwear.
In one of his few interviews he's done about it, because it was one of those situations where the experience he'd had, it wasn't particularly great, so he didn't talk about it until much later on in his career, Peter Weller. And he said the most difficult scene to film was, there's a scene in a nightclub where he goes to arrest Ray Wise's character, and it was literally walking down the stairs in the club, because obviously he can't look down because he's supposed to be a robot who just knows where he's going. So he said it took 3 takes for him to not look down the stairs, basically, because he had to walk with purpose and walk in a straight line down these steps. But he's a fully fledged character by that point. He's out sort of fighting crime. We got our first introduction to the Robocop March, which is the score that accompanies Robocop for the rest of the film, which is one of the most memorable. It's this sort of mix. They consciously went for a mix between synthetic sounds, synthesizers, and an orchestral score. So you get this very sort of clunky beat to the score, as well as an orchestral piece to it as well. And then we get to see some of his sort of early crime fighting, really. There's this robbery in this sort of mini-mart. He easily dispatches the potential robber. I think he sends him flying into a fridge, if I remember right. And then you get this attempted rape scene, basically. These 2 guys who are have got this woman making some really weird suggestions about hair down there.
Yeah, I didn't really get that.
But what I love about that is that it starts off, that scene starts off, and it's so uncomfortable, particularly obviously for women. I would imagine that it's very clear what these guys are after, what they're going to do, and by the end of that scene, it's completely flipped on its head, because to any guy, it's it's like talking about getting kicked in the balls or anything like that. It just makes you feel completely uncomfortable. So it just flips that completely on its head. And then you got this hostage situation at, I think it's the former mayor or something like that, or a councillor or something like that. And it just shows how sort of badass Robocop is, and how easy it is to foil these minor sort of crimes within Detroit. But then things start to change for Robocop. He starts to remember. He starts to have dreams. He sort of goes out into Detroit and bumps into Emil. He remembers Murphy, and he remembers this phrase that he used, which is
Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
which is a massive,
Yep.
badass line, and a really epic explosion as well at this sort of gas station. It sort of goes down this thread then of Murphy remembering who he is. He goes to his house, which sort of blends in with his memories. Really sort of seamless effect, although there seems to be sort of random bits of shit in this house as well, which is sort of really sleek and clean for potential new buyers, but there's just broken mugs and pictures left behind, which I thought was a bit odd, but it sort of adds to the scene, I suppose. And then more Clarence Boddicker-ness, I suppose, from Kurtwood Smith. He kills Bob Morton again, just completely plays with him, shoots out his legs, pulls out the pin of a grenade with his teeth, and leaves him to blow up. Straight into the next sort of action set piece. This sort of cocaine factory. Randomly sniffs some wine, dips his finger in and sniffs it, which is completely bizarre.
I don't want to fuck with you, son.
It's one of the more uncomfortable bits of this film, considering everything else that goes on. I've never understood that, but it's a great sort of 80s style symphonic shootout within this sort of factory. And then he arrests Clarence Boddicker, throws him through multiple windows. And a nice little fact here, the point he starts recording his conversations or his arrest of Clarence Boddicker is only after the point during the Miranda rights where he says, anything you say may be given in evidence. And then he starts recording. So it's a nice little aside there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop. He just keeps going then, this film. He confronts Dick Jones. He can't arrest him because of this Directive 4. Has this sort of final showdown with Ed 209. Gets blown up by the police, basically. An ultimate sort of full circle, what he's supposed to be a part of. Ultimately try to destroy him. And then it does sort of slow down a little bit here, because it takes it back to this sort of human aspect of Alex Murphy, really. They go back to the steelworks. Removes his helmet, which is quite symbolic. It's got OCP on the side of it, but again, a really good makeup effect. When that helmet comes off, it looks pretty seamless. You can't see the joins. It looks like a living, breathing sort of creature. Brings out the humanity of the character. And then, as you mentioned, we get this sort of final showdown with all the bad guys. He majestically sidesteps out of the way so that Emil goes flying into a big vat of toxic waste. It's an amazing piece of makeup effect. This is pure Rob Bottin. It's gloopy, it's disgusting, it's horrific. Another little bit of trivia is that Ray Wise, who obviously played Leon, hadn't seen the makeup effect.
Oh,
so
okay.
The first time that he sees him, and the shock that he sort of portrays was genuine, because he'd not seen the actor in the full makeup. But it is pretty disgusting. and it's pretty grim once he goes. Well, he just literally melts, doesn't he, for going through the car.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite a satisfying end for Clarence Boddicker as well. There's this line about "I'm not arresting you anymore," and there's this genuine sort of fear in Clarence Boddicker. He gets this nice big glob of blood that just pours out onto Robocop's chest. Again, another thing that's slightly longer in the director's cut is his demise. It's a little bit bloodier than it is in the final film. And then straight into the final sort of bit of bullshit from Dick Jones as well in the boardroom. Still trying to push Ed 209. There's still a gun in the boardroom as well, which is just pure America.
Have a gun everywhere.
Just in a nice little display box. And yeah, you get this perfect conclusion to this film. Obviously he can't arrest Dick Jones because of Directive 4. It's been set there to avoid this kind of thing. And the old man, as he's credited, delivers the final line.
Dick, you're fired!
Thank you.
Which another one quickly before I finish this. Dan O'Herlihy, who plays the old man, also in
Halloween 3.
He's in Halloween 3 and he's also in Twin Peaks.
Oh,
But you won't
he?
have got to that yet.
No, I didn't recognise him, but I did recognise him, but I didn't know instantly where from. And then I realised he was like the evil corporation owner in Halloween 3. I'm a big fan of Halloween 3. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but... And it was funny because he was playing a slightly like nicer character in this. He wasn't the big evil corporation guy. Dick Jones was the big evil corporation guy in this. But I liked the way it does end very suddenly, because I thought there would be something after that. And as soon as he gets blown away, it's just boom, it's end.
It's perfect. I mean, there is a bit of a dodgy effect when he goes flying out the window. It's this kind, I don't know if it's stop motion or what, but his arms are slightly too long as he sort of goes flying down. But yeah, that's it. It's this line of...
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
Bang, credits, gone, done.
Yeah.
It doesn't need an epilogue. It doesn't need anything. That's it. Perfect. He's realised who he is. He knows he's regained some of his... or enough of his humanity to know who he is, what he is, and perfect ending to a film. I'm assuming if this is the first time you remember watching this film, I'm assuming that you haven't seen any of the sequels.
I haven't. I understand there's 2 sequels. I was going to ask you about that. Are they worth checking out? I asked my husband last night because he is a Robocop fan and he's seen it multiple times. And he said, from memory, the second one was okay and the third one wasn't that great. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yeah, I mean, Robocop 2, 1990, it's... half of it is good.
Right.
It tries too much to be Paul Verhoeven without Paul Verhoeven. It was actually directed by Irvin Kershner, who directed Empire Strikes Back.
All right, okay.
Which is a bit it's very random. It's worth a look, Robocop 2.
Right.
I think it's more of a nostalgia film. I think if you saw it when you were young, you'd probably like it. I watched it fairly recently and it didn't quite hold up. Robocop 3 is a lot softer. It's not as violent. It loses a lot of the satire that's in 1 and 2. But that was sort of designed to move towards a TV series, which came around in 1994, which was very TV PG, as well as a series of sort of TV films that were called Prime Directives, I think 2001, which you can find on most low-key streaming channels, the free channels, Plex and things like that, which they're all bad, to be fair. They're not good at all. I mean, Robocop 3 does still have Nancy Allen, Robert DeQuay, who was Sergeant Reed. So there's a bit of continuity there, but it's just not the same. Have you seen the remake?
No. Is that 2014 or something?
Yes. It's worth a look. It's nothing like the original. Whereas this film has minimal sort of, you only know about his family from these sort of snippets of dreams and memories and what he's telling Lewis in the beginning. This has a good 30 minutes of building him as this family man and his relationships with people, and the satire is not quite there. There's this whole sort of corporate greed angle that's in the original film, but it's just not the same. It works reasonably well as a sort of action piece, but it's not a patch on the original.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say about Robocop. It's one of my all-time favourites. Brilliant film.
I really enjoyed it. As I said, I thought I'd seen it before. I don't think I had. I think it had just been similar movies. And I think sometimes you think you've seen films just because you hear them talked about a lot, if that makes sense. And as I said, my husband definitely is a big fan. And I think, I don't know if this is a sexist thing to say, but I think if you were a young boy at a certain age seeing this, I can understand how it would be, quite a big deal, and why, like, you might have quite a bit of nostalgia attached to it as well, which is similar to what I've got with Basic Instinct, because you kind of remember seeing it for the first time. And I think as well it does have all these different themes, because you could just watch it and say it's an ultra-violent movie, but actually the stuff about the corporate greed and, treating this poor guy as a kind of thing.
Well, there was something I actually picked up on this last rewatch that I'd never picked up before, and I love that about films, when you can watch something time and time again, and it never sort of twigs with you. And I think you get that, even with Basic Instinct. You watch that as a teenager, you think it's a film about sex and drugs and corrupt police and everything else, but then you see the subtext in it. There's a point in this film where Bob Morton says, when they're talking about the Robocop program reasonably early on, about how they've restructured the police force to basically suggesting that they've got these good cops from other areas within Detroit into the shit area so that they would be killed and be applicable for the Robocop program. I can't remember what the line is exactly, but it's like, we've restructured it so that we can deal with potential candidates or something like that. But you just think, and that's so. The script for this film and the story is just so dense, and everything just fits and works and becomes a part of the whole story. And I always love that with a film. If you're sort of rewarded by repeat viewings, and you can keep watching it and you can keep picking things up, they're the best kind of movies.
Yeah, actually, after hearing you talk about it and maybe some of the things that I didn't pick up on a first watch, I would definitely be up for watching it again, to try and pick some of those things up. I thought it was quite interesting that it was set in Detroit, because when I was kind of reading up on it, apparently Detroit went bankrupt in 2013, and you've seen Barbarian, haven't you? Mm-hmm. And it's also set in Detroit, and there is this stuff about it being kind of crime-ridden and really run down, and, I thought that was quite an interesting place to set it. And obviously it's a kind of dystopian view of Detroit. It's not exactly what Detroit was like in 1987. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was quite interesting, knowing kind of what we know now about. And actually, a guy at my work had been, I think he was at a stag do or something in Canada or something weird, and he went to Detroit and he spoke about kind of what a rundown place, and the city has no money and there's all this crime. So I think it was a perfect kind of, obviously it wasn't filmed there, but it was a perfect setting for this kind of movie.
Okay, so that about wraps us up for Best Paul Verhoeven Movie. How did you find that, Vanessa? Your first podcast experience?
Yeah, I found it really good. I really enjoyed it. It was it wasn't as nerve-wracking as I thought it would be. I was quite nervous before it, because I just didn't know, which is because I've never done it before. But yeah, I really enjoyed speaking about both films, especially because Robocop was a new watch for me, and you obviously know it kind of inside out, so you had a lot of insight into like how it was made and some of the technical aspects that I wasn't really aware of. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cool. So, do you have any sort of social media, any way that people can maybe get in touch with you if they wish to do so?
I don't understand Twitter, so I'm not on that. I have an Instagram, which is at Vanessa Cordner. I'm on Facebook, Vanessa L. Cordner. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they're probably the best places to get in touch with me.
And you can contact us here at Movie Jewel Podcast in a number of different ways. First of all, the Facebook page. If you like and follow that, it will keep you updated on upcoming episodes, upcoming selections, and upcoming guest hosts. You can also send us a direct message through there if you wanted to get in contact with us. You can email us at moviejewelpodcast@gmail.com. Personally, you can follow me on Letterboxd. I have a Letterboxd account, which is Pete Marshall, if you want to keep up to date with some films that I'm seeing at the moment. And if anybody is interested in becoming a guest co-host on the Movie Jewel podcast, you can contact us on those platforms already mentioned. You don't need much. You just need a passion for film, a microphone, a webcam, say a laptop or a PC. It's really that simple. So it just leaves me to thank Vanessa for joining me on this episode of the Movie Jewel podcast, and for me to say goodbye, and for Vanessa to say...
Dead or alive, you're coming with me.